Hey book friends, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to my favorite books from 2024, you guys. This has been the best reading year since I've started BookTube. And it's been about 5 years. I'm coming up on 5 years. This year has been the best. And not only in terms of like number of books, although this is the highest by far. Like I'm somewhere around 80, 85. But also in terms of 4 and 5 star books, I've had so many that it was very hard to make this list. But I only wanted to pick 10 books. I wanted to be forced to pick my favorites, even from my 5 stars. And so you guys, we're gonna chat. We're gonna chat all about my favorite books of 2024. So hi, my name is Angie. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you are new. All of the things, you guys. I better hop in because I have so many books I want to talk about, and I feel like I'm going to be gushing a bit in this video. So like I said, I have ranked 10 books. I ranked them because I thought that would be fun. It was hard, but it was fun. And so I'm going to share my ranking with you, starting on book 10 to book 1. But first I wanted to do some quick honorable mentions. Now, these honorable mentions aren't necessarily 5 stars. They kind of encompass my reading year, which has been like series focused. You guys, I read so many series in their entirety during this year. Like for example, I read the Cruel Prince series. I really enjoyed it. This is by Holly Black. I read this at the beginning of the year. It's a YA fantasy series. It has to do with fairies and it includes some of my favorite characters, or at least character interactions, and that's Jude and Carden. I'm honestly not exactly sure what I love about these books, but I have totally drank the Kool-Aid on this series, you guys. It was so entertaining. I loved it. Another book series that I read all in 2024 was The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. So we're talking Clockwork, Angel, Princess, Prince, all of these. You guys, these are so much fun. I read the first series last year, Mortal Instruments, that's what it's called. And I got in the world. I really enjoyed it. Again, YA fantasy. This series, though, was so much better. I think for me, it's a couple things. It's the time period, so it's kind of a historic London. We're still doing the whole shadow hunter, fight the demons sort of thing. I really enjoyed that. But I think for me, it was the characters. It was the characters that just like, I was rooting for. There even is a love triangle in here, and I'm not always on board for love triangles, but sometimes I am. And this is an example where I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed all 3 people. They were very distinct in my head, like the character work is spot on. I don't know what else to say, but I just really enjoyed that series. Now I have a couple other series that I reread the entire series, and I guess I read one for the first time. But Hunger Games I read this year. I don't need to say too much about this. This is such an enjoyable, nostalgic series that I feel like is better upon reread. And this book, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I feel like was an excellent read right after binging the original trilogy. It made this one so much more fun. And now there's going to be another book come, I think, March. And so I'm so excited. The last series I want to do a quick honorable mention is the Inheritance Game trilogy. Well, series. I can't even say trilogy anymore because there's so many new books, right? I love this series. I love it. I'm missing one. My sister's borrowing it. But I read all of these this year and they were so much fun. The original 3 and now all of these new books, spin-off books, short story books. This is more like YA mystery series with puzzles and games and such, and just the characters are so much fun. So much fun. So those are a few honorable mentions, a few series, rereads, but let's just get into my top 10, you guys. All right, coming in at number 10 is this book. I loved it. The Weaver and the Witch Queen by Genevieve Gornichek. You guys, I love this book. I read The Witch's Heart last year, and it was one of my top books of 2023, and so it's no surprise, really, that this is part of my favorites. This is also a historical fantasy book. This, I feel like, leans more into the historical kind of family saga than that book, but the writing is still so rich. And so this is about a pair of sisters and their friend during the Viking times, and we start with them as children, but we don't spend too much time there, and I'm pretty happy about that because our main character has a tough childhood with a tough mother and some things happening, but yet early in their childhood they kind of form this like blood bond that keeps them tied to each other, and they all have their own paths to take, and horrific things happen, and one of them is like kidnapped during a raid, like a Viking raid, if you will, and the other 2 like band together to find her. And so if you just really enjoy a rich environment, like the setting was so real, and then the characters were interesting, very fun to follow, sometimes very frustrating, but that didn't matter because the whole thing just was such an adventure, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. And so highly recommend this one. All right, coming in at number 9 is an Agatha Christie. I also feel like I often have Agatha Christie on my favorites. But I finally read Murder on the Orient Express. And you guys, I've not seen the movies, and so I did not know the reveal. And if you don't know the reveal, hurry and pick up this book because it is so worth the read. I feel like it makes the reading experience so much better if you don't know where it's going, because this is about a murder on a train. Basically, the train is stuck in a snowdrift and it's kind of isolated in the middle of, I can't remember, Siberia or someplace. And there is a set number of characters, and then there is a murder, but yet Hercule Poirot, our main investigator, is on the train. And so you get to follow his process. I feel like of all her novels, this one has a bit of a unique setup in the sense that he goes from like passenger to passenger and conducts interviews. And that happens a bit in the middle of the book, which I think could bog a person down if you don't know that. But I really enjoy that because I like the idea of like grabbing little bits, and you're trying to connect, and you know that Hercule Poirot is so much smarter than you and he's putting it all together, but you really want to like figure it out. And it was so much fun. I highly recommend this. It's a classic murder mystery. You have the ability to potentially solve it, and that is just really, really fun for me. Okay, so number 9. You guys, number 8. I really enjoyed this book. Initially, I gave it 4 stars, but then I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since I read it. So I just pushed it up to a 5 and I put it on my favorites list. And that is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I loved this book. It is very secret history adjacent, which I knew going in. So it wasn't like I was like, oh, it totally ripped off secret history. It didn't, because it has such a unique difference. It's very similar in the sense of there's an elite school. In this case, it's a very arts-centric school, and our main cast of characters are all in theater. And so they're in their 4th year, and this whole time they've like only done Shakespeare plays. They talk to each other in Shakespeare quotes. It's fantastic. I highly, highly recommend the audiobook if you haven't read this book, because it really helped with the cadence of the reading of the Shakespeare, and it improved it a lot. But yet, you know that things are going to start falling apart, right? There's this tight-knit group, which I found that I just really love a tight-knit group. And then there's a murder. One of them dies, and you're there for like their entire senior year. So all the buildup, all the tension, all the like, this is going badly, things are happening that kind of precede the murder, and then it all kind of goes to crap, and everybody is uniquely responding to what happened, and it's a lot of like mental health issues, so very reminiscent of secret history. But I also loved the way this book was set up with the narrative of, at the beginning, you're meeting with the character that has been put in jail for the murder, and he's kind of telling his story because he's getting out. And now he's telling his story. It's so good. You have to read this if you haven't. I realize it's not a new book, so most of you probably have read it, but I highly recommend that. So this one's number 7. I really enjoyed this book. So Belladonna, I finally read Belladonna. I've been curious about this book for so long. It's by Adeline Grace. It's kind of a gothic romance fantasy type book that was so good, and I cannot wait to continue on with the series. I still have book 2 and 3 to read. But this first installment was amazing. It was so good. It's about our main character of Signa, and Signa is special in the sense that she's just kind of resistant to a lot of different poisons and things like that. And so she has encountered death. And in this book, death is a character. I love that. It's always been a trope that I really enjoy. And Signa is very enamored with death in both like positive and negative ways. Like she blames him for a lot of bad things that have happened in her life, but yet she seeks him out in the current situation where she has been sent to kind of her last remaining relatives to live in this Thorngrove, I think. Yep, Thorngrove mansion estate thing, and things are kind of a little off, but yet she starts to kind of really fall for these people and want them as her family. So she has to figure out what's going on. So good. I really, really enjoyed it. I actually read this one in a reading blog, so I'll link that above if you're curious of my like in the moment take on this book. Oh my gosh. Okay, here's another one. Man, every book here is so good. So coming in at number 6 is The Women by Kristen Hanna. I could not include this book. This is a very impactful book, a very emotional book, a very standard Kristen Hanna book where she crafts really real to life characters and then puts them in these horrendous situations. In this case, it is a combat nurse during the time of Vietnam. And the first half-ish of the book is her in country. Like, she is actually on the front lines. She's in the hospital. These things are happening, and just what it would have been like, potentially. I mean, according to Kristen Hanna, what it would have been like, what it would have felt like, just the stressors involved with war and caring for these men. So that was outstanding, but yet that was not it. Like, if that was only what the book was about, it would have been good, but not as good as it ended up being, because this book also focused on the reentry of the veterans during a time when the public was very against the war. And so it felt like it was hard for people in America, just regular citizens, to support even the vets who were at war because they were so against what was happening. And so they were met with terrible things when they got home. On top of that, it was worse for the women because they weren't treated as like vets, if you will, because they weren't soldiers and there weren't women soldiers at that time. So when she went to seek mental health help from like the vet hospitals and things like that, she was turned away because they're like, well, you weren't really at the war. And if you think about it, man, she saw some terrible things just being at the hospital. It was so good. I loved it. Number 5 is a book that's a part of a series that I've also talked about on my favorites videos, so I'm consistent at least. And that's the 4th Richard Osman book. So The Last Devil to Die, the 4th book in the Thursday Murder Club series. I loved this book. It was so emotional. It was so hard-hitting in just the feels, but also the mystery was really good. So I just enjoy these books. I enjoy the characters. I love their tight-knit group of the 4 of them as they solve murders. But even more than that is like their conversations on life, really. Like, they've lived all this life, and now as they're coming to the end of their life, what kinds of conversations do they have and how do they look upon things? And it's just really wise. There's so much wisdom in this. And then there's a story arc that will just break your heart, but really well done. So I won't say more than that since it's the 4th book, but I loved it. It was so good. Okay, coming in number 4. Now we're getting to books that it was just so hard for me to rank them. It was so hard. But this one, number 4. The Collected Regrets of Clover by Mickey Brommer. I also have a reading blog for this one. This one came out of left field for me. I did not see it coming. That was the video where I was doing like a scavenger hunt with my bookshelves, and this is the one that ended up with. And it is about a death doula in New York City. And she's had a challenging life in the sense that there's been just a lot of death around her, and so she has built just this protective shell around herself, like the belief system that she can't be with people or people will die, and so she's just closed herself off to feelings and relationships and all the things. And this book is about her coming out of that, her learning to be vulnerable, her learning to trust people, and her blossoming into her life. And it's just a beautiful story. I mean, it goes through some of her career choices with being a death doula. It also has a lot to do with her grandfather because her parents died when she was very young. And so it's just really good. It's very heartwarming. It's very thought-provoking. I feel like this is a type of book that will make you want to stop and consider life, consider decisions, consider how you're looking at the world. So it's so good. Okay, now down to the last 3. Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. I just can't stop raving about this book and just gushing. Really, I've been gushing about this book because it's about this midwife that lived, I think, late 1700s in Maine. So this is right around the time of the Revolutionary War, or right after the Revolutionary War within American history. And I feel like our author, Ariel Lawhon, did just such an amazing job of bringing that time period to life, bringing just kind of the rawness and how there was like laws, but not really. And there's a lot of like take it into your own hands sort of situations. Our main character of Martha Ballard, who is an actual historical figure, got really wrapped up into this case of a woman who accused some of the rich and influential men in this small town of rape. It was so hard to read and so hard to just kind of live with the vulnerability of women in these days and how some people felt untouchable, but yet our main character just was very strong, and it put her in some very vulnerable positions, not only her, but also her family. But on top of that, what I also really loved was just this touch point in history. Like, you also followed her and her husband and their kids. Most of them were grown. You kind of got a glimpse into like motherhood and this just really sweet marriage and all of these things that I just really enjoyed. It made the story come alive in a completely different way. So, The Frozen River, number 3. So number 2 on my list is a trilogy, because I also read this in its entirety this year and I loved it. I am not sure if it was just right time, right place. I haven't really read any sci-fi and I've been curious about sci-fi, and this just landed for me. It landed, I feel like, for a number of different reasons. The trilogy is called The Devoured Worlds by Megan E. O'Keefe. And the first one's The Blighted Stars, then The Fractured Dark, and then The Bound Worlds just came out in 2024. And so this is really just like a space adventure story. And so the backdrop of this story is that Earth is not as inhabitable as it has been in the past. And so a lot of people live on ships and they're out looking for a better world, like a more inhabitable world. But there is a problem, and the problem is that there is this parasitic kind of organism that keeps taking over these worlds and making them non-inhabitable. And so we have our main character of Tarquin, who is the son of one of the main leading families in the solar system at this time, and he's on this mission to kind of look for this new planet. But then something happens and their ship actually crashes onto this world. And then on top of that, we meet our other main character of Naira, who has previously been a bodyguard to some of these really influential families, but then she's jaded for a lot of different political reasons, which is a great subplot within this whole series, is kind of the political unrest. And so she also crash landed onto this planet, and they're kind of enemies-ish. That's probably my favorite part, is this definitely has an underlying romance that is so very subtle. I just really enjoy how it was written. Very slow burn, very work through your issues. I don't really want to spoil this because it goes so many different directions and the world expands, but yet there's still kind of that central problem that they're trying to solve. And it's so good. You guys, I really, really enjoyed it. And so if you are a sci-fi reader and this reminds you of any other kinds of books, let me know, because it's a genre that I'm very intrigued by now. I feel like I could really get into books like this. The very last book, the top book of the year. It took me so long to decide on this book, but then in the end, I really knew it was going to be this book, because this has been a story that's been on my mind since I started this first book, and that is The Passage by Justin Cronin. This is not a new book. Actually, I have no idea. I'm gonna look. 2010. This came out in 2010. I'm already bent a little bit towards pandemic type books. As a scientist and someone with my PhD in microbiology, I just love this kind of a storyline. I always have. And so in this book, you start out by following this group of scientists who are tracking like this virus. And then it starts going kind of weird and kind of bad, and they bring it back to study it, but then you're not sure exactly if they're the good guys or the bad guys. They're the government, but yet some of what they're doing seems very, very unethical. But then it all starts going badly and this thing is kind of unleashed. That happens kind of early in this book, and the rest of the series is taking on like the ramifications of that. Now, what I love about this kind of a book, I love the character work, because you're kind of diving deep into these characters. There's one in particular named Amy, who from the very beginning, you're following her storyline, and she's said to kind of be the savior of the world, and you're not sure why this little girl is the answer, or going to be the answer to all that's going to come out of this story, or all that's going to be unleashed onto the planet following this pandemic event. But I also love the cast of characters that comes after, because this is very generational in nature when it's telling the story. So it hops a bit into the future, and it really paints the picture of what happened, the devastation of this singular event. And then you go back and you get a little bit more information, and I just love that way of telling a story where you're just getting a little bit more, and it feels so very clever. And I just love the scope. And I feel like every time I talk about this book and this series, that's how I feel about it. Now, I have the last book to still read. It's definitely going to happen, I think, early 2025. That's my hopes and my plans. And so this was my favorite book. I did enjoy the second book in the series as well, but this one, hands down, just set the stage for this story. And I just loved it. I loved it. So those are my favorite books of the year. It's definitely a blend of a lot of different genres, but it was such an enjoyable year. I would love to hear from you on some of these books. Have you read them? What do you think? Your thoughts? It's okay if you didn't love them as much as I did, but let me know your thoughts on that. And also let me know your favorite books so far of the year, because I'm always looking for new recommendations from you guys, because I think this was actually a recommendation from one of you, as well as The Frozen River. So yeah, you guys do good work when you recommend me books. So please recommend me some books, or just let me know what your favorites were. That was my request. But otherwise, you guys, it's the end of 2024. And so if you have nothing else to say, give me some sort of like celebration emoji, because I can't believe it's the end of the year. But that's all I had. I definitely gushed all I needed to gush in this video. I hope you all are well, and I will see you in the next book video. All right, take care.